Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Gold Brick Road, the path that we are called to walk in this life, should we choose to accept it. Now, we are your hosts, Kenji Shimada and Carl Brockman. Welcome to another episode, and today we are joined by the wonderful Anthony Metivier. Anthony is the founder of the Magnetic Memory Method, a systematic 21st century approach to memorizing foreign language, vocabulary, names, poetry, and much more in easier ways that make it elegant, effective, and fun. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
No worries. And first of all, I guess, Anthony, why memory?
Well, it's a long story, but at the end of the day, if you take the ideal, you learn something once and then you remember it. And you have it at your fingertips when you need it, and then you use it. So I think of it almost like a martial art of the mind, where you almost don't want to ever have to need it, but if that such a situation occurs, there's a lot of things that would be very, very useful to just whip out as accurately as possible, or even inaccurately, but still cause the desired effect, and deal with the issue. So that's generally the way I think about it.
How'd you get into it? Like, where did it start from? And I look at your YouTube, I look at your online presence. We had the privilege of getting to know each other over a coffee recently, and that was the question I left with. I never get to ask is just how do you fall into this? What was that for you?
Well, I was in grad school, and I had a very, very bad depression, and I just kept getting worse and worse and worse. It was like a movie where the problem starts and then another problem and then another problem. And specifically the problems were it was winter. In Canada, they have winters where the snow can get up to over your head. And in fact, that winter, they were almost about to call in the military to clear away the snow. So I was isolated because it was very difficult to get around. And I had all these really big textbooks with lots of foreign language phrases in them and stuff like this. I had a language requirement in my PhD, and on top of these deadlines coming, like I have to tell them what my dissertation is going to be about. I have to study for 2 field exams. I have to on and on and on. Like there's all these requirements, and then this letter from the government arrives telling me that even though I still had 3 years to go, they were going to start collecting on my student loans. So I just flipped out basically. And I thought, well, I'm either going to go jump off the bridge, or I'm going to quit this program, or I'm going to become a street magician. That sounds like a weird leap in the mind. But
God, I hope you became a street magician.
well, I did actually, but I did also finish my PhD. But at that time, YouTube was really quite new. And you were seeing David Blaine and stuff like that. And you were seeing all these YouTubers trying to be like David Blaine. And I did manage to get up to the campus. I was at York University in Toronto, and somehow I got up there. And there's this part of York University campus at the time called York Lanes, and it sort of imitated an outdoor street. And these street magicians came up to me inside of this area on the campus, and they said, "Hey, you want to see a trick?" I said, "Sure." And I watched their trick. I knew exactly how they did it. And I grabbed the deck of cards and I showed them a trick. And they're like, "What?" And I remembered that trick from when I was 7 years old. And so that's where this all started. Because I went home and I thought, well, okay, the bridge is not that nice. So I'm going to escape life and just study YouTube magic and stuff like this. And then I came across a trick that, I have to be careful with my siblings in the magic siblinghood. But there's a trick called any card at any number. And basically, if you can memorize a deck, there's many ways to do it, but one of them is to memorize a deck of cards. And I listened to this description of how they're memorizing a deck of cards with something called a memory palace. And it's just like, this is not possible. This is ridiculous. But nonetheless, I thought, well, I'll give it a try, because the ability to do a trick like that just is amazing. So I memorized a deck of cards, and I couldn't believe it. But I instantly saw, if I can get all of these weird phrases like omnium expediendorum prima spendien qua perfecti boni forma consistent on cards, and I put them in memory palaces, well, it's the same thing, right? And so that's what I started to do. And I noticed this little effect, which is that I didn't feel quite so depressed anymore. Didn't cure depression. I had to take pills at the time and all that, but it made me feel better. Years later, I found out that there's actually research where a researcher and his team, Tim Dalglish is his name, he took people with depression and PTSD and he taught them the memory palace technique, and they also started to feel better. So there's something to that. But anyway, long story short, I went and I finished my PhD and quoted Nietzsche in German at my dissertation defense, and then I got a Mercator scholarship, and I was off on a career as a film professor. And then it was only years later that I ever thought of teaching it. I mean, I used to sometimes teach it to my students when they would say, "How did you remember all our names?" Or, you know, how do you remember all this stuff? And I would teach it to them. But it was an accident that I got into it as a business. But that's how I got into memory.
Interesting. I'm curious, like you said, that it did do something of, like you said, it cured a bit of that depression for you, and there's research that has come out. Did you figure out what some of those components were? Like, in my mind, I'm feeling like you were able to focus your mind, you're able to put your attention to something, really apply yourself, but was there more?
Well, it can have to do with dopamine production and perhaps serotonin. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, and those are good questions, and I can just only speculate at them. But at the end of the day, yeah, if you're repeating a negative behavior and your prediction is constantly that there's going to be a negative outcome, that will, I believe, do stuff to your neurochemistry. There's actually a really interesting book that came out a while ago called The Experience Machine by Andy Clark, and he talks about predictive processing, how the brain is constantly actually creating its own predictions. So if you can somehow change the prediction that you're making, then you can effectively rewire your brain. And that, you know, we've known about rewiring the brain for a long time, but that's probably part of it. So it's probably not just one thing or the other. But if you do, and we hear about people having moments of transformation all the time. And then the question is, can you figure out what that trigger was? And then can you get yourself to repeat it? And then can you predict that the likelihood that it's going to repeat that positive effect? And then you just go from strength to strength to strength. It turns out in the ancient Indian traditions, they have little tools for this. So there's a very famous, at least to me, I don't know if it's famous to everybody, but I come across it so often in my research that it seems famous. There's a Sanskrit phrase, which is neti neti, and it means not this, not that. So as a mantra, you can continually reinforce the state of bliss that you come to experience, that when a cloud of ignorance intrudes, you just say neti neti, and then you blow it away, sort of thing. Or at least you work at blowing it away. And because you've had success with it before, then it does. And there's many, many little Sanskrit tools that I've come to learn over the years. But that's I think that's part of it. So the old Sherlock Holmes, I must go to my mind palace, has a little bit of truth to it in this sense, because the Dalglish research, which I wish I would have known back then, because it would have helped me a lot easier. What he did with the PTSD people is he said, create a memory palace and put X number of happy memories along a journey. So if we were in a memory palace now and on my bookshelf, I would put a happy memory, and then I'd have another happy memory here. And if you're having symptoms, you go in to the memory palace and you fire off these happy memories. And so that's creating that effect. And if you get a positive benefit once, then you have predictive processing that you can reasonably be assured to do it again and again. And I've been doing that exercise ever since that I heard of it. But even without deliberately putting happy memories into memory palaces, you have no idea how happy I felt when I could actually remember things like, I don't know, architectonic tautology, you know, like just weird phrases like that, or constructio pregnans, like all this stuff that I was studying at the time. To be able to actually remember it was massive for me. So it made me feel good just to be able to do it.
Interesting. Because I was going to say, I still do a lot of performing arts, but big scripts sometimes, like you said, you feel chuffed knowing that you could iterate, 2-3 pages and pull it out. And also names. I used to work in hospitality. If I could remember every customer's name, it just felt great. But a little bit from my ignorance, and maybe just so our listeners also, when you say memory palace, I guess my understanding is you are putting memories and I guess, invoking or putting that energy or the positive reflections with it so that when you can access it again, you can remember it more easily. Is that what memory palaces are?
That's a way of thinking about it. There's many ways to do it. The story that's usually told is the story of a guy named Simonides of Kos. And he, in ancient Greece, was at a banquet. And he was a very, very famous poet and speaker. And at the banquet, he was addressing people at a table in front of him. And he was just ripping out the most amazing poetry that you ever did hear. And then at the end, he thanks Castor and Pollux for imbuing him with all these wonderful ideas, or something along these lines. There's many variations on the story. Anyway, he then goes to the banquet organizer and he says, I am ready for my commission or my fee or whatever. And the organizer, he says, Scopas, that's what his name was. Scopas says to Simonides, he says, well, if you thought that Castor and Pollux helped you so much, why don't you ask them to pay the bill? So the evening goes on a little bit, and then all of a sudden a messenger comes to Simonides and he says, come outside, you better come outside. And Simonides is like, what's going on? I still haven't been paid or anything like this. No, you better come outside. So anyway, he goes outside and there's two figures in the distance, and they're like, a little bit closer, a little bit closer. Turns out that it is Castor and Pollux, and they say, just a little bit closer. And then once he reaches their horses and he's in their presence, a giant earthquake destroys the banquet hall, and everybody inside dies, including Scopas, who wouldn't pay the bill. This is that usual kind of like over-the-top revenge in ancient Greek mythology. But what ends up happening is they ask Simonides to help them identify the dead. And he says, oh, well, there was Polyphetes, because that's where he was sitting. And there was, Xerxes, and there was Xenophon, and like all these names of the people linked with exactly where they were sitting, because their position in space is an image. It is the image of them in space. So now, if you take something like one of these phrases I just said, constructio pregnans, if I take this space here in my room, or even just my finger, right, and I put, I don't know, Cookie Monster, and I have him constructing something, because C and C go together, or a hard K sound in this case, Cookie Monster and Constructio, and I can have him with an Oreo cookie, Constructio, right? Oreo, Constructio. Now, it's not like I'm putting a special energy there, although certainly you can elaborate it so you project energy. You can do all kinds of things, and we could talk about that. But the core is a logical link, actually. A logical link that in this space, this sound association with some sort of image is here, and you just hope that nothing crushes your hand, like the banquet hall was destroyed in order to achieve the effect. But that's the core of it, and that's not the origin of it, but often people say it's the origin of it, but it's much older than that. And in fact, the hands were used. There's an ancient Aboriginal hand memory palace that I learned from a guy named Tyson Yunkaporta here in Australia, who wrote a book called Sand Talk. And connect, respect, reflect, direct. Those things are memorized on these fingers as part of a traditional meeting structure. So your hand can be a memory palace, basically.
Yeah, Montessori talks about the hand-brain relationship. She was very big on using those hands and actually doing tactile things, because that was how the memory was created with children. So that's fascinating. And I was going to say that relationship and story seems like how you create those memory palaces. I can only imagine, how did, I guess, your story transform, Anthony, as this unfolded for you of memory? And, you talk about being an autodidact on your YouTube channel as well, like helping people to learn more, be more effective leaders or learners as self-taught people. How has that transformed your life?
It's been amazing. I mean, the fact that I got through my PhD transformed it, because I was ready to quit. And actually, that wasn't the first time I was ready to quit. Later, after I got through all my courses and I passed my field exams, my PhD supervisor, he said, the market has changed. You're very unlikely to get a job. You publish 4 books, you're still going to have a hard time getting a job. And I remember saying to him, well, if push comes to shove, I will make my own damn university. Now, that's pretty much what happened. But after that meeting, I was living in Manhattan at the time. So I went from Toronto to Manhattan, and I sat looking over the Hudson River, and I was like, this is insane to spend one more day finishing my PhD, because lots of people finish ABD, it's called, all but dissertation. So why am I going to write this book that 7 people are going to read, right? And memory helped me. I mean, I just remembered my father, for example. He never went past grade 3. So I thought for nothing else, I would do it for him symbolically to finish what I started, because he never had that kind of opportunity. But also I thought of Mount Everest for some reason. And it's just like, people climb that for no damn good reason other than just to get it done, right? Like,
there's a huge queue at the top of that mountain now, I see.
And, you know, what else are you going to see except for other mountains to climb, right? So you might as well at least, like, do it. So I got myself, by remembering certain things, to finish it. And I knew about self-hypnosis and sort of stuff. So I made myself little tapes, and I would listen to my own voice, like hypnotizing myself to get this ridiculous document done and so forth. So that was transformative.
Wow.
But actually being able to pass the dissertation was transformative, because my memory came into play in that. I was attacked by one of the members, and they were like, where's all the Nietzsche in your dissertation? And I sort of pushed the document forward and said page 72, you know, and was able to remind her. And actually my dissertation supervisor was here recently, and he said he remembered that scenario a little bit differently than that. But nonetheless, I still got the PhD. And then after that, I got what's called a Mercator guest professor award or whatever. It's from the DFG or DFG in Germany, which is Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, or the German Research Society. And it's one of the biggest things you can get. And I just went there and I taught, you know, and even still dealing with some depression, some of which was self-induced because I drank like a fish at the time, which was stupid, but that's what I was doing. I was able to prepare lectures really, really quickly. I was able to deliver them, and that training ground, so to speak, is how I've been able to write blog post after blog post, year after year, because I was under duress producing lectures week after week after week for a very long time, or maybe not a very long time, but a couple of years. And so it was a great training ground. And just remembering what it was that I was talking about, when I later started to write about memory, you talk about implicit memory, I know how to remember that. You talk about the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe and like whatever. Students ask me, how do I memorize the extensor pollicis brevis? I am not a doctor. I have no idea exactly what it is, but it's somewhere around here, and it's near the navicular, which can also be called the scaphoid. And then you got the lunate, and you know, over here is the hamate and the capitate, and here's the pisiform. Like, I just memorize all this stuff, and that has been transformative, because when people see that I can do it, then they are a little less skeptical of their ability to not do it. And it's even a little bit more mind-blowing when they're just like, because people tell me, oh man, you're not even a doctor, and you know these things. And I don't really, I just remember the names. But nonetheless, it's not even about me being transformed. It's about the ability to transform others by showing the transformation. And I think that ethic is important.
So you said that it was the dissertation that transformed you, but wasn't it finding memory?
Well, I think we're transforming each and every minute if we want to get into what I really think.
Yeah, tell us what you really think about time.
Yeah.
Well, if I were ever to write a book that would be called The Philosophy of Memory, I would take a metaphorical leap, and I would make the argument that something about reality itself is analogous to memory. So what would that mean? Well, it would mean that there are intensities, there are flows, there's an ongoing recursion where the thing that is builds itself out of itself through reference to itself, right? And so that is essentially what memory is at its core, if we think about it in a metaphysical and a ontological way. The experience of the experience of being a creature that exists is something like being able to use self-reference to produce. And then the metaphysics, the reality that you experience, is basically associative, right? And so I could go deeper than that, but I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's a question out there that, everyone's always asking of where are these memories, right? There's some people say, oh, it's in the brain. I don't believe it's in the brain. It's like held elsewhere. I'd love to hear, where do you think those memories are stored?
well, yeah, that's a great thing because I think that what we have is we have a proliferation of storage and retrieval devices, and there's no individual brain as such. There's certainly individual meat tubes, but the idea that the meat is the brain is a shared hallucination, essentially, or a shared metaphor.
That the brain is the mind.
Right. And what we have in society is, there's a great philosopher named Gilles Deleuze, and he said, when you have the microscope introduced into the world, well, then now people start to think of aspects of the world as microscopic, right? It just spreads through the network. It's not that any one individual is like the dude who made microscopes go viral as a way of thinking about things. Like it's literally, it's a literal physical way of looking at things, but then it becomes a way of thinking about things. And so we have that with cities. People started to think, like Leonardo da Vinci, he thought of the body as a system very much like the city. And that proliferates, but it's not like Da Vinci's the guy who came up with it. That's a idea that is spread like wildfire through the storage and retrieval devices, some of which are human brains. Some of them are drawings. Some of them are languages. Some of them are, these days, hard drives, platforms, all these sorts of things. So there are some scientists who have called to get rid of the word memory because it's just simply not sufficient to the cause of describing what we're talking about. Yeah. So, but scientists getting rid of words has never really quite worked out. But maybe they'll do it. I don't know.
There is a great religion of science at the moment, so I would not be surprised. Carl, did you have a question?
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
I love so much about what you're sharing, and I think about my lived experience. That the biggest call out for me is just that the power of story. You've referenced it indirectly quite a lot, just how powerful it is. You spoke about to have these happy memories in like a linear fashion up to this point, and how that can extend, and we can call on them in our darkest times. And I think about myself in some of my darkest times, and I know just how powerful it was for me to think about my story. And that, like you literally said at one of your comments at the start of this podcast was, it's like a movie, right? And it is like a movie. You're in the belly of the beast, and that time in our lives is always prior to transformation, should we choose to accept the call. And I just love so much about the depth of wisdom that you're able to share, Anthony. Thanks so much for remembering it all. I really appreciate it. But tell us about how that story leads to now. And you also spoke really quickly, if you'll allow me, just how powerful it has been for you to be a teacher. How powerful it has been for you to share this wisdom and to put your hand down to help grab others and pull them up while you are pulled up by your leaders and mentors. How has that story sort of unfolded to the magic memory method and the games that you're playing today?
Yeah, so after I finished this Mercator guest professor, it's not really a scholarship, it's a grant, I guess. I wound up back in Canada, and it turns out that nobody really cared about this accomplishment that I thought was so great. And
Damn.
my dissertation supervisor was right. Like, I had published quite a few things, and nobody cared. So I was very happy, though. I managed to get a job interview at my dream university that I really had known about since I was a teenager, and always thought that it would be great to go there. And in that interview, basically, without putting too fine a note on it in the politics of the time, I just wasn't the guy they're going to hire. Emphasis perhaps on the. Anyway, if that's not too coded. But in any case, the thing that ended up happening is I was in a bit of dire straits. Like, I had some funds left over from the grant, but I had no idea what I was going to do. So I was house sitting for a relatively established author and photographer that I knew in the Vancouver area, which was very kind of him to let me bum out in his house. And then I just called around various places to see if I could find some kind of job. And I found this woman entrepreneur named Haiti Windy, who had a place called Elite, which was English language intensive training. And she hired me to write university level curricula for her students. So it was like an after school that was really attractive to immigrant parents who wanted their kids to have an upper edge because they weren't getting what they expected in the public school system. And so that's what I did. And one day, and by the way, this is a visual story also, I had, through various misadventures in Germany, I had lost a front tooth that is in the bottom here. And partly it was like my German got quite good, but it wasn't good enough that I knew actually what they were going to do. I didn't know they were going to like put this giant retainer in that would cause me so much pain when they pulled out this tooth. So later in Canada, I was carving at it myself to try to like make it smaller. And I'm just lucky I didn't choke myself to death because it would like pop out in the back of my throat while I was sleeping, all this stuff. Anyway, I'm trying to save up money to get an implant, which I eventually did. But I didn't have the tooth in this one day while I'm just working away, and I have this gap tooth. And Haiti comes in and she says, one of my teachers hasn't been able to show up. So she gives me a hair elastic and she's like, tie up your hair, get in there, please, and teach them this stuff. And it had to do with, grade 12 English literature or whatever. And I knew whatever it was that they were doing. So like 15 minutes later, I told them, here's how you analyze some story, blah, blah, blah. What do you want to do next? And they're like, we don't know. You're the teacher. So I said, let's memorize the alphabet backwards. And they're just like, what? So about like 5 minutes later, they're reciting the alphabet backwards because it's really quite simple to do when you have a memory palace. Maybe it wasn't 5 minutes later, but a certain amount of time later. Mm-hmm. And then I said, hey, would you like to learn how to memorize some playing cards? And I just happened to have a deck. So I got them to memorize like 4 or 5 cards, they were astonished by this. And they said, would you please write this down? And I was like, yeah, okay. So I went to my office, and that became the genesis of my first book. It's a little bit of a longer story there, but I'll pause there. But how that book became a bestseller was all an accident. but anyway, I wrote this document for them, and that's how I basically started. And how it transformed me is just when I used to teach the memory stuff at university, like people would just be curious how I memorized everybody's names so quickly. But these kids, like they had this curiosity like you would never believe. That they're just like, how this is magic, and it just gave me a certain energy that they they weren't skeptical like a lot of adults are, or older individuals who are just becoming adults like most university students that I had encountered before that.
I guess, how does it feel when you have those kids and younger people who are hungry to learn and eager? Because they're not a lot of the young people I see. I don't see a lot, but I love working with children and love seeing that learning happen inside of their brain. How was that experience to see that what you're bringing is like adding some really powerful, valuable to their life?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the technique itself is kind of reminding yourself of how you think when you are a kid. Just playing Lego in your mind.
I was just going to sort of comment on just how powerful that abundant curiosity is. Like to see the world with just a genuine interest and just be open to what you can learn. I've been lucky to have had some more astrological stuff be shared with me over the last year, and before that year, I was the same as those older students you were talking about, Anthony. Like, oh yeah, the stars. Like, what could it teach? What could it teach me about me or people or the human experience? However, that's led me to learn so much more deeply about the journey. Like that book that you wrote about recently, Anthony, The Sleepwalkers, and how the evolution of thought evolved from how we saw the sky and our reference and relationship to it, and how we saw God and the heavens separate from the earth because we thought the earth was the center and the bottom, and just that how when the shift changed from seeing the center not as the bottom but a part of the whole, the unifying whole, and how that evolved and enabled conscious thought to grow. Just astounding history, and also just a deep respect for a human evolution under the stars. You know, the light pollution that we have now is how old? It is 100 years old, if that. And for thousands of years before that, it was just our relationship with the world above. And just so much depth of wisdom has been bannered in astrology that I have so much appreciation for. And if I was just blind and like, no, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, there's nothing there, I would have missed out on a very interesting curiosity that I have now, and I'm grateful for that.
Oh man. And I was just going to say that power there, right, of story and acknowledging our story, where we came from. How do you not so much rewrite it, but like you said, Anthony, how do you organize it to a point that that's actually powerful for you? You know, it's not just pulling you down anymore. Like my kung fu teacher, he'd always talk about, you know, your past is your past, obviously your future, but to realign, you know, that past, to make peace with it. It's like a bow. He's like, unless you reorganize it to a certain trajectory, it's always going to be shooting arrows to places you don't know. But if you straighten it up, make peace with it, you know, acknowledge that that was where you came from. And I guess you see that time and time again, Anthony, of like the power of powerful stories to be able to bring that alive. And I just got to ask this question, because I think in one of your, I think it was the TED Talk, you said you were a devout atheist for a certain point of your time. And I'm guessing along this journey, something happened to you that broke through, you know, the threshold. What might have that been?
Oh, right. Yes. I think militant atheist was the term that I used.
He remembers.
No!
Makes you look like a fool, Kenji.
No. But I don't mean to.
No, I was joking.
I just think devout is actually maybe even a better thing. But the militant part is like, I really would. And because I remember things, or I commit things to memory, like people who would come at me with the alternative to atheism, you know, I would just hammer. Like I was militant about it. And to be honest, sometimes I still can be, because nothing in particular has changed other than that I got really, really interested in exploring the thing that I was rejecting. So similar to what Carl was saying, you know, here comes the astrology, and it's like, oh my God, the stars and all that sort of stuff. But the thing is that if you reject all that stuff, you really don't know what you're missing that you could poke around in there. So basically what happened is an Australian named Ben Fishel, he had a blog at the time called Project Monkey Mind, and somehow he heard that I was in Australia. So we arranged to get together, and we were talking. And we both meditate and all that sort of stuff, but he's like meditation level 95, and I was like level 1 or something like this. And he said, do you ever think about memorizing mantras? And I was like, are you kidding me? And I went on this like militant hammering. And he said, well, there's this guy, you should read, Gary Weber. He had the same thing, and he needed the secular blah, blah, blah. And he found the Sanskrit, and he memorized the Sanskrit, and then his thoughts turned off. And I'm like, BS. Right. But he's like, well, you can memorize this stuff. Like, why don't you just give it a try? So I was kind of annoyed by this, but I went home and I ordered the book, because I have this weird little rule that I sometimes follow called speed of implementation. And so I make myself order the books that people say as much as I possibly can. And so I went and I got this book. I didn't immediately start doing the stuff with it, but it somehow got in my mind. And then, long story short, I memorized over 1,700 words of Sanskrit. And the Sanskrit is, I would say it's actually uber atheist. It's like atheist times 100,000. So my friend's inclination, Ben saying, you know, like this Weber guy needed secularism. I had no idea that you could actually be like so ultra secular. And I can explain more about what I mean. But at the end of the day, I kind of screwed up in my TEDx talk. Like I didn't script it very well, because what I should have said at the end is, it's neither that I'm an atheist or not an atheist anymore. It's that this endless need to label things has softened, and as much as I can possibly get to, it's just like gone. You know, it's neutralized. And what I really wish that I would have done is that I would have shared the phrase in Sanskrit about the like-dislike monster, because I only mentioned the like-dislike monster. But the actual phrase is very beautiful. It's it's Turtva, Maharnavam, Hatva, Ragadveshti, Rakshashan, Yoga, Shantasanta, Yuktatma, Ramo, Varajate. And that means those who kill the like-dislike monster in the ocean of delusion arrive in tranquility. Now, that is to me much better than, oh damn, I get to have this label. I am a believer, I'm a not believer, I'm this, I'm that. Who cares? Like, I used to need these categories, and I still do. Like, we need categories. That's what we do. And it's like one of the frustrating things of speaking with each other is that we sometimes know that the people that we're talking to are more humble and more modest than that they seem. They're less certain than they seem. But because of the way language works, we have to use words, we have to use categories, and we all often wind up, it's like Zeno's paradox. Like, the arrow never reaches the target. Like, as long as we're using language, we're missing the mark. And that Kenji, that arrow that needs to be corrected sort of thing that you mentioned. I mean, the thing I learned, I think, is, can we get rid of the bow and the arrow altogether, right? And just be so to speak, and not even be, because that's too much, so.
Yeah, well, I think that sort of ties beautifully to, one of the Hermetic axioms, the lips of wisdom are sealed except to those of understanding, right? How do we really speak into the unspoken? And the moment we use words, we're sort of living in paradox straight away, because we say one thing, it's going to mean something else. But I know that at Goldbrick Road, where we find that power, and Carl, we were talking about it this morning, of just how, challenging our assumptions, time and time again, and not assuming that just because they say this, with us, we talk about verify, clarify, share understanding, because if we don't, how easy is it to be misinterpreted or to not get the message across, which is obviously with us, leadership, and brand messaging is just something so powerful. But I guess with that one, Anthony, what would be, to close this up nice and clean, what would be the greatest message that from yourself, Anthony, or from the magnetic memory method that you would share to the Goldbrick Road listeners to how to improve their Goldbrick Road, stay on it, when they fall off, get back on it?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I would maybe think, what do you connect to in your memory? Like, if you resonate with Goldbrick Road, what is the memory that you think makes that resonant with you, right? Is it the Wizard of Oz sort of thing? I mean, not that it's a Goldbrick Road in the Wizard of Oz, but that's the kind of thing that comes to my mind. And then what is the meaning of that, right? And so I could go start thinking about how cool it was that it always played every Easter in Canada on TV, that sort of thing. And then how that later I became a film studies professor, and how its moment in history has to do with color and, that rich saturation of multi-sensory analysis. Anyway, not to turn it into my own exercise, but just to demonstrate, I think one of the best things that you can do is when you hear a quote or you hear these kinds of nuggets of wisdom that your fellow entrepreneurs are sharing and so forth, is turn it into a memory exercise and try to think, okay, so that really means something to me. Why? And then look and find where in your past either something similar happened or you heard something similar, and try to work it out, because it'll give you not only a better ability to remember that new thing, but it'll give you more insight into how you tick. And one of the best things I ever learned is, if you can understand who you really are, what it is that you really want, you'll be able to sleep at night. Because if you keep following roads that are not really the roads that resonate with you, you're just gonna suffer. Yeah. But if you can find the road that you actually want to be on, like really, really want to be on, then it's not turbulence free, but it's more like cruising altitude a lot more of the time.
Beautiful.
Oh, mate. I don't think we could have finished it any better, but any last curiosities, Carl, before we finish off?
No, I just want to say thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us today. We could have spoken for 3 hours, but in the essence of respecting all of our times, we'll wrap up there. Make sure you go check out the Magnetic Memory Method. Anthony has an awesome YouTube channel, great content, awesome applicable, practical wisdom that you can apply to your everyday life. Sign up to his blog, LinkedIn. He's been writing. Does your blog live anywhere else, Anthony?
Just at magneticmerrymethod.com. There is a blog, and the LinkedIn is more of an experiment. But yeah.
Okay, no worries. And his newsletter. I've started getting Anthony's newsletter, and there's been already some helpful tips in there. So go suss him out and check him out. But thanks so much for your time, Anthony. I've really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Great to speak.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much to our listeners. And yes, we'll make sure to put that all in the show notes as well. So check it out. Check out Anthony. And last of all, this was something I wanted to get in, but you know, self-learning being a massive thing for me that I've tried to improve upon. Anthony's got some great tips out there, so please check it out. But once again, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us on the Gold Brick Road.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Take care. Bye.